Welcome to the Mongabay Newscast. I'm your host, Mike Gaworecki, bringing you the news and inspiration from nature's front line. This is the final episode of the Mongabay Newscast for 2022, but it's also the final episode in which I will be serving as host. I launched this podcast together with my esteemed colleague Eric Hoffner as producer back in September of 2016. It's truly been a pleasure to bring you the news and inspiration from nature's front line twice a month for the past 6 years, but it's time for me to move on. And to celebrate my last episode, I want to revisit some of my favorite episodes from the past few years, and those would all be episodes that featured bioacoustic recordings. Bioacoustics is a relatively new but rapidly growing field of research, and it has been particularly fascinating for me to explore the many ways that listening to nature is helping inform how we go about studying and conserving wildlife and the ecosystems that all life on this planet rely on. We've got a number of bioacoustic recordings to listen to today. I'm going to run through these in chronological order. So our first trip down memory lane is taking us back to July of 2019, when we welcomed Jessica Krantz, a research biologist with the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, onto this show. Krantz was part of the team that discovered right whales singing for the first time ever. These songs are composed of gunshot calls, however, and those are exactly what the name implies: loud, concussive bursts of noise. That doesn't sound very musical, and it's not, at least according to human standards, but they are songs nonetheless, because the critically endangered eastern population of North Pacific right whales that were recorded by Krantz and team were using gunshot calls in repeating patterns, which is what makes these recordings the first known example of any right whale population in the world breaking into song. Here's Jessica Krantz speaking with me back in 2019 with more.
It is difficult to listen to them and think, oh yeah, that's a song, because they sound very, very different from what people expect to hear. So, when you're listening to this, you want to listen for the very regular timing in between them. It's a very consistent spacing or consistent duration between the gunshots. And with this clip also, you can hear there's almost a progression where at the end of the clip, the gunshots sound very different from they do at the beginning. And we think this is something that the whale is doing as opposed to just an artifact of propagation, because it is like that in every iteration, in every song that they sing, that there is that progression of gunshots, which is really interesting to hear.
Okay, let's take a listen. The other eastern North Pacific right whale song type we're going to hear today is also composed entirely in gunshots, but the timing is substantially different.
So you'll hear kind of 3 gunshots in the beginning, and then there's a short, about 2-second duration of silence, and then they start up with gunshots that have a kind of an alternating amplitude. So it goes from loud to quiet and loud to quiet. But then it slowly, throughout the song pattern, the amplitude then becomes consistent throughout. So instead of it being loud, quiet at the beginning, at the end of the pattern, they're the same volume, basically.
Here's that song. Now we're going back to September of 2019 when I spoke with Jim Darling, a marine biologist with the Hawaii-based NGO Whale Trust, who came on the show to play us some recordings of remarkably similar humpback whale songs from around the world. Darling was part of a global team that recorded humpback whale songs over the course of 3 breeding seasons at sites across the Pacific, in the Philippines, Japan, Hawaii, and Mexico. These recordings revealed that humpback songs from what we took to be entirely separate populations can be incredibly similar to each other. In fact, they're nearly identical, which means that our view of the whales as living in distinct breeding groups that only rarely interact might be completely wrong, and that would have huge implications for conservation measures targeting the species. Darling played 4 humpback songs for us, one from each of the main breeding grounds in the Philippines, Japan, Hawaii, and Mexico. But first he played for us an example of a theme change in humpback songs.
We sort of have to just get back to the basics of song a little bit. And, humpback whale males produce this 10 to 20 minute long sequence of sounds, very loud sounds, mostly during the winter half of the year. And when they get to the end of this sequence of sounds, which, an average song might be 12 or 15 minutes long, then they start again at the beginning, and then they keep repeating this sequence. The sequence, though, is not simple. It consists of patterns of sounds which are repeated, and we call these patterns phrases. So a whale will repeat a certain phrase some number of times, maybe over several minutes, and then we'll just stop and change to a new phrase, which it will repeat a bunch of times. A few more minutes down the line, we'll change again to another phrase. And this repetition of a single phrase is called a theme. And, it varies a little bit, but often, the whales in the North Pacific at least have 4, 5, 6 themes in their song at any one time. If you think of, letters of the alphabet as different sounds, a typical song would start with a phrase which might be A, B, B. And the whale will repeat the A, B, B, A, B, B, A, B, B for a few minutes. And that would be theme 1. And then it would shift to different sounds, a different phrase, which might be C, D, C, D, C, D, C, D. After a few minutes, it will shift to yet another phrase, which might be E, F, 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 E, F, F, F. And it will repeat that until it gets to the end of its sort of current repertoire of sounds. Then it starts at the beginning again. That's the general composition of the song. But where it gets interesting, or more interesting, is that these songs change, or this composition of song changes gradually over time.
Okay, so here's an example of a theme change in a humpback whale song. We've got recordings from 2012 to 2013 made in Hawaii, Japan, Mexico, and the Philippines to listen to. As you were saying, these songs change over time.
And in fact, the pace of change varies, and we're not quite sure what triggers faster change or slower change. And even in some parts of the world, as it happened in the North Pacific, there can be very abrupt changes where the whales change their entire song fairly quickly. But the most common situation, certainly in the North Pacific, is the songs gradually change over, periods of weeks or months, where you start to see little differences, from weeks or months earlier. The thing here is, though, that all the singers in a population change their song together. In other words, at any one time, if you go out and make a recording of a singer, you get a certain song. And if you go, 3 or 4 kilometers away and make a recording of another singer, they'll both be singing the same version of this song. And the same will be true with all of the singers in a certain population, say in Hawaii. So the way we're using that is we're saying, okay, if the whales, the only way that one can explain this is the whales sort of had to listen to each other and somehow meld songs or incorporate the changes of their neighbors. We're not quite sure how this works, but it apparently does. So if we make recordings of singers in different locations in the North Pacific and they're singing the same version of this ever-changing song, then we say, okay, they had to mix somewhere along the line. And that's pretty much, what we're doing to define these populations by their song.
Okay, so the first recording we'll listen to is from Hawaii and was made in 2012. You and the Whale Trust made this recording, right?
Yes. Our study in Hawaii has been going on for a long time, decades, I guess. And yes, we record each season off of Maui. It's just a very good place to study whales. What you're going to listen to here is the same phrase, which, is recorded in all of these four locations across the North Pacific. I think the phrase is, I think it'll be very easy to see that it's the same phrase spanning the ocean. There is a little bit of difference in the sound, which is because the ocean conditions are different in each of the locations, and the distance from the singer is probably a little bit different, and the hydrophones are probably slightly different. But it's a composition of the phrase that we're interested in, and that's identical. I mean, it will not be hard to make the match.
And these are all from 2012 to 2013?
Yeah. The study spanned the years 2011, 2012, 2013. The song changes gradually enough that the same phrases are found in each of those years.
Okay, here's the recording from Hawaii, 2012. Now here's a recording from Japan made in 2013. This recording is from Mexico, made in 2012. And finally, here's a recording from the Philippines, also from 2012. Now we're going to listen to some elephant recordings we featured on the podcast in May of 2020. These recordings were made by researchers with the Elephant Listening Project, which is based at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology at Cornell University, but conducts its field work in the Central African Republic and the Republic of Congo. Anna Vera Rami, a research analyst with the project, joined us to play some forest elephant recordings made in clearings known as bais, as well as recordings from the forest itself, and to explain how learning more about the elephant's communication can help to improve measures to protect them.
Here we're going to take a listen to what the forest actually sounds like. So not just an elephant-centric location, but what all the biodiversity in basically the Congo Basin, what that sounds like at once. So this is a daytime clip. It's a really, really cool thing to listen to.
The next sound clip is from Mongabay in the Central African Republic. Mongabay is one of the forest clearings that ALPS researchers are working at.
This was taken during the day, and it's really cool actually because at night it sounds really, really different just based on other species that are out communicating versus not in the day. But here you'll hear a bunch of elephants basically talking to each other, negotiating over the mineral pits that they're there to drink from, and it sounds kind of like Jurassic Park. It's really cool.
Let's listen to an example of elephant communication at Mongabay. It features a greeting ceremony between two elephants who have been named Kate and Tess.
Very similar to humans, where if you've, probably what I'll do after this pandemic is over, I'm going to go see my friends and, I'm going to yell and be super excited and, hi, how are you? How's it going? I haven't seen you in so long. And similarly, we think that's what elephants are doing. And so while they're in the forest, it's just a mom and her offspring, which is usually one or two, based on the age of how old they are. But they're coming to this clearing and they're seeing family members. We actually have data showing that a mom will come and her daughter, who's also has her own family at that point, will come to the bay on the same day. So it's really interesting. We don't know what's driving it. We wish we knew. Hopefully one day we will. But similarly, friends will also do the same thing. So here we're going to listen to something called a greeting ceremony between two elephant associates or friends named Kate and Tess. And so this happens, I think, right in front of the platform, our observation platform. So it's kind of loud. But basically, the interpretation of it is that it's two friends meeting up after a long time, super excited, asking each other how they've been and just yelling about it. So...
In November of 2020, I spoke with Valeria Torti, a research technician at Italy's University of Turin, whose work focuses on critically endangered Indri lemurs in Madagascar. Torti shared a number of lemur calls with us and told us about the population and demographic information scientists can gather from these kinds of bioacoustic recordings.
So the first clip we are listening is part of a duet emitted by the reproductive pair of a family group of Indris in the Marumisa forest in eastern Madagascar. This clip make us hear the overall song structure that is, as I told you before, is made by a brief introductory series of roars followed by long notes that are particularly emitted by males. And then we successively can hear the proper song that is a succession of notes in which every note has a frequency that is lower than that of the previous unit. This is a duet, so we have an adult male and an adult female singing.
Let's give it a listen.
from our studies, we found that songs have a consistent sex, group, and individual-specific features that could help us to infer about the groups and population composition. And we also found that there is a significant correlation between genetic distance between individuals and between members of each family group, and the acoustic similarities of their notes. And this is especially true for the notes composing the descending phrases. These notes inform about genetic relatedness that is especially true for males. Male vocal signatures have been indicated as an important mechanism for inbreeding avoidance, and what we think is that the fact that male songs convey generic information may help females in avoiding mating with related males. And this is, in fact, functional in a species that form long-term bonds, like the Indris, and in a species in which extra-pair copulation may occur, as we have observed, for example, in Marumisa, and those providing the females with the potential to discriminate with related males could be very interesting for increasing level of genetic diversity in the population.
Okay, so tell us about the second clip we're going to hear.
The second clip is what we call a chorus. That is a song in which more than two individuals participate. In this clip, we are listening to a part of a song emitted by the reproductive pair and their young daughter. The structure of the song is always the same, but we have one more individual of the same sex, in this case a female, that is singing with the mother. And during choruses, when two Indris of the same sex sing, they could both sing together or alternate their contribution during the song. So in this case, we have a daughter that is 1 year old, so she's singing by partially overlapping the mother. And we think that this could also help the youngster individual to start to sing in a proper way this kind of different and difficult, very complex signal.
All right, we'll give it a listen. For an October 2021 episode of the Mongabay Newscast, I spoke with Jeff Wells, Vice President of Boreal Conservation for the National Audubon Society. He told us about a partnership the Audubon Society had with the Seal River Watershed Alliance, a coalition of indigenous groups in Canada seeking to establish a new indigenous protected area covering the 12 million acre or 4.9 million hectare Seal River watershed in northern Manitoba. Wells played for us some bioacoustic recordings of birds in the watershed and talked about how those recordings are used to study the watershed's importance to wildlife. The first recording he played for us was of a fox sparrow.
So the fox sparrow is a very kind of a large rusty-colored sparrow that people are used to seeing in the winter in much of the U.S. Most of the fox sparrows of the world winter down in the U.S., but they breed in the boreal forest. Their song sounds, some people say it sounds kind of like R2-D2 in the Star Wars movies. I don't know, just a beautiful song that kind of has this ups and downs to it, whistled song that some people think sounds like R2-D2.
All right, let's listen to a fox sparrow in the Seal River watershed. And we've also got the common nighthawk.
Yeah, the common nighthawk is a pretty cool bird. It's a so-called aerial insectivore, which means it gets all of its food on the wing. It eats insects and captures them on the wing. It's part of a family of birds called nightjars, which are birds that are active either only at night or right at dusk and dawn. And it's a pretty large bird, kind of a wingspan of a couple of feet, I guess. And it looks in flight like a hawk. It has these kind of narrow, sharp wings and it darts around the sky. That's where the nighthawk part of its name comes from. It's common nighthawks, like many aerial insectivores, have been showing declines across their range. And this has been true of all sorts of birds that eat insects on the wing. There's been really sharp declines. So people have been very concerned about the future of common nighthawks. They're actually on the special concern list in Canada at the national level, and so there's been a lot of attention paid to watching for them. One of the cool things about common nighthawks is they give a call, a very buzzy, beat sort of call that carries from a great distance. So while they're flying around in the evening at dusk, they give that call, and they give it often also while they're in courtship flight. And one of the cool things they do is they dive, the males do this steep dive and make this humming sound with the feathers as they dive, and it's a sound that sounds almost like a jet or something, kind of zoom. And so in the sequence we have, you can hear the peent of the bird high overhead, and then at one point the zoom sound, which you might not even think was a bird, but it is a common nighthawk sound.
And tell us about the common raven.
Yeah, ravens are, of course, a famous bird of the North. Many First Nations have different traditions and stories related to ravens, and you see a lot of symbols of ravens in the North. Ravens are related to crows, which people are familiar with, but bigger and with a very large beak and kind of a wedge-shaped tail. And they're just a striking part of the northern landscape. And on the recordings we have, there's all sorts of sounds of ravens. They make an incredible diversity of sounds. And so we have a clip of some of the more traditional kind of croaking calls of a raven. I think there's a second one in the background a little bit that you can hear as well.
Back in June of this year, I spoke with Sarah Trabue, a research assistant with the Wildlife Conservation Society's Ocean Giants program, who was the lead author of a paper detailing the findings of a bioacoustic study of bottlenose dolphins in the New York, New Jersey harbor estuary. Trabue told us about what the study revealed about dolphin behavior in the highly trafficked waters of New York Harbor, and played for us some of the dolphin vocalizations recorded as part of the study.
Yeah, so bottlenose dolphins produce a variety of sounds. So whistling, they produce, typically it's associated with social contexts, and many people are familiar with the idea of a signature whistle. But the basic premise is dolphins produce a particular whistle that has a contour that's associated with a particular individual. But they also produce whistles in other contexts as well. But here in this study, we didn't study whistles. Instead, we studied a broadband sound that are echolocation clicks. So dolphins produce echolocation clicks when they're navigating their environment and foraging. And they can also produce clicks in social contexts as well. But the basic premise behind these echolocation clicks is, just for some background in case people don't know, so dolphins produce echolocation clicks, and the premise there is that they produce a click. That click travels through the water, it hits an object, and it echoes back, and the dolphin perceives that echo. And so they can use information about the timing of that echo in order to create an image of the world around them, create a spatial awareness of what's going on around them through the echo of that sound alone. So you can imagine that when they're just navigating their environment, they produce clicks, every so often just to get a basic idea. So you have a click, a click, a click. And then if they produce a click and there's a sense that there's a prey item, then as they approach that prey item, they start to produce clicks a little bit faster so that they can get the echo of that click and have a better sense of where that fish is in the water. And then when they get really close and the clicks get really, really close together, it starts to sound to our ear like a buzz. And so that's where the term foraging buzz comes from. It's actually echolocation clicks that are produced in very rapid succession with a very short duration between the clicks. And so we can look at the time between the clicks. It's called the interclick interval. And when it's short enough, that's what we can use to infer that a foraging buzz is being produced. And from there, we can infer that feeding activity is taking place. And so what you hear in some of these audio files, you'll hear both those whistles, but you'll also hear some clicks. And sometimes if those clicks, you'll hear click, click, click. But when they get really close together, it'll sound like a buzz. And that's the foraging buzz.
Okay, here's the bottlenose dolphin clicks and whistles. And here's a couple recordings of the foraging buzz, which I'll just play back to back. While we usually featured recordings and experts to help explain how bioacoustics can inform science and conservation here on the Mongabay Newscast, there's tremendous value in simply appreciating the sheer wonder of the natural world and its sounds, especially as many of those sounds are disappearing from the natural world as bird and insect populations decline due to the biodiversity crisis. That's why I was quite pleased to speak with George Vlad just last month. He's spent the past several years traveling the world listening to and recording nature, and while he does share his recordings with scientists and researchers on occasion, his main goal is just to listen to nature for its own sake, and to inspire others to do the same. He shared with us some of his recordings from two different locations, the Javari Valley in the Brazilian Amazon and rainforests in Africa's Congo Basin. The first recording we're going to listen to today is from the Javari Valley, and it's one of my favorites that we've ever had on this program because it is just the sound of a thunderstorm approaching in the rainforest.
While I was there, I told you I was there in the so-called dry season, but the dry season isn't dry. It's just the dry season is wet, and the wet season is much wetter. We had a few thunderstorms. We had very heavy rain. They used to come in the afternoon. We'd see them on the horizon from a vantage point. So I'd see a lot of lightning and hear a lot of thunder. And I got some nice photos of that, some nice video. But it sounded to me like they were either too far away or they would come very close so fast that I wouldn't really capture the sound of the thunderstorm approaching. So one afternoon I could see this thunderstorm kind of circling around us. It was moving from place to place, but it was not getting close. Luckily I had 4 or 5 recording rigs out, so a few of them captured it very beautifully. And this is one of them. This is probably the best recording I have of that thunderstorm. It was spectacular. I was out on the porch getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, but I couldn't get myself to go back to bed because I wanted to see what was happening. I wanted to see the lightning and hear the thunderclaps. And then, it was pretty amazing. I've experienced thunder and thunderstorms in other parts of the world, but these were just probably the most violent, but also the most beautiful. There's this feeling you get from being exposed. I wasn't really exposed because I was in a little hut, but at the same time, I feel like I wasn't 100% sheltered, because if there was a big enough storm, it could have destroyed my little hut. If there was a thunder strike nearby, that could have set things on fire. So I was kind of feeling this exposure, but that made me more alert and more aware of where I was. I was very immersed in what was happening, which for me made it even more beautiful and exciting.
Next is a recording called Calm Rain in Secondary Rainforest. I don't suppose this is the same storm you captured approaching.
No, this was I think it was recording at night. It was recorded in the same place we played the recording of the Calm Afternoon with the same rig, but I think this was 2 nights later when there was no thunder, or there was very distant thunder, and the rain was not very violent. It was just calm and I would say relaxing, I often woke up at night and walked out and had a quick listen to what was happening, just to check, if there's new species in the surroundings, if there's things happening that I could record. And one of my favorite things was to go out when it was raining, to just feel some of that coolness after a very hot day, and to listen to it, because it's amazing. Rain can sound like a million things, and there's so many factors, so many variables, like the thickness of the leaves surrounding the microphones, how the canopy is. If the canopy is very thick, it's only going to let the rain fall through after half an hour or even an hour of raining, and then you get all these big drops. If the rain penetrates through the canopy fast, you get these little drops. So there's so many ways you can talk about rain, and this is one of the rain recordings that I made there that's more relaxing rather than worrying or stressful or anxiety inducing.
Vlad also shared with us a recording of a thunderstorm approaching a bai in the Congo Basin. You might remember from the elephant recordings we just listened to earlier that a bai is a natural clearing in the forest where elephants like to gather. And in fact, you can hear elephants in Vlad's recording as well.
So that is recorded in the Languia Bai, which is a big clearing in the rainforest in the Vindo National Park. And there's an observation post there that's a bit derelict. It's almost falling apart now. And you can spend the night there, apparently. I had to choose between spending the night there and leaving my equipment there to spend the night for me, which I chose in the end. I preferred to have these good recordings instead of me being there. And this, as I said, this is a huge clearing in the rainforest, the size of many football pitches. And in the middle, there are mud pools where elephants and gorillas and other animals, they come to look for minerals, and they frolic and they bathe in the mud, they have a lot of fun. And they make sounds as well. So we witnessed this moment when there was a small family of elephants. There were mothers and babies. And then all of a sudden this big male comes, and he was obviously, he felt like he felt like all the other elephants had to make way for him. So he was, brash, and he was making a lot of splash, a lot of noise, calling here and there. And obviously the others moved. But these interactions, you would get the immediate sound, where they were calling and splashing around. But then you get these reflections from the edge of the clearing, which were amazing. And you can hear some in this recording because you also, you get the thunderstorm and you get the sense of how big the space is. But then every now and then, I think there's 2 instances of an elephant trumpeting, and it's not just trumpeting, it's a very weird primal scream where, it feels, it's hair raising for me, If you listen to it on good speakers and at the right volume, you can kind of get a feeling of what it's like to be in this place, in this part of the world.
Okay, here's thunderstorm approaching a bai. And the last of Vlad's recordings that we're going to listen to today is of a lush dawn chorus in a young rainforest.
One of the reasons I think these rainforests that have just sprouted, they're the very young ones that had been logged down and then they kind of sprung out again. They are so lush they're so lush because it's a boundary between a place where humans live. They live in very close, they live very closely with nature. So you can't say that they're destroying it or, taking it over. And then there's also the secondary rainforest that is, as soon as you get away from the village, you get into secondary rainforest. And this is a place of boundary where species that kind of, they need to live around humans because they feed on refuse and things like that. They gather there. You get species from the secondary rainforest because that's kind of the edge of their habitat. And you get other species that just happen to be there, because it's a clearing in the rainforest. So you get this beautiful mixture of things that you would not get in a very deep and thick rainforest.
Well, that brings us to the end of our show, but before we go, I want to encourage all of you to go back and check out all of the full episodes that these recordings were originally featured in, because the researchers and conservationists we spoke with who played us all these recordings had a lot of great stuff to say about their work and the important uses of bioacoustics. There are links to all of these episodes in the show notes to this episode. If you enjoy the Mongabay Newscast, we ask that you please help spread the word by telling a friend. That's the best way to help expand our reach and keep the show growing. Another way to help is by becoming a monthly sponsor via our Patreon page at patreon.com/Mongabay. We are a nonprofit news outlet, so just $1 or more per month would really help us offset production costs and hosting fees. If you're a fan of our audio reports from Nature's Front Line, please head to patreon.com/Mongabay to learn more and support the Mongabay Newscast. That's patreon.com/Mongabay. You and your friends can join the listeners who've downloaded the Mongabay Newscast nearly 500,000 times by subscribing to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Or you can download our app for Apple and Android devices. Just search either app store for the Mongabay Newscast app to gain fingertip access to all of our new shows and all of our previous episodes. And of course, you can read all of our news and inspiration from Nature's Front Line at mongabay.com. Or if you prefer to keep up with us on social media, follow us at facebook.com/Mongabay, or on Twitter and Instagram, our handle is @Mongabay on both those platforms. For the final time, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has been listening to the Mongabay Newscast and supporting our work. It has been much appreciated. I am your host, Mike Gaworecki, signing off for the very final time. Like I said at the top of the show, it has truly been a pleasure. And the Mongabay Newscast is not going anywhere. It will be back in the new year with more news and inspiration from Nature's Front Line. So stay tuned.